Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Kris. This is Abraham Lincoln, A Journey to Greatness. Why am I doing so many Abraham Lincoln things? Well, today, the 17th of May, I have about 2 hours ago returned from the home, the grave, and the museum. Did a bunch of shorts. Check them out. Hope you like them. But we're going to do this. This is the Lincoln Home National Historic Site. Subscribe there. Give that thumbs up. The national parks actually own the Lincoln House. It was purchased by the state of Illinois from Thomas Lincoln. No, Robert Todd Lincoln for $1. And the agreement was the house tours are free. So I recommend everyone should go there. Museum's also awesome too. It was made by Disney. Created by Disney with help. Before we get started, I also have a thanks button here. You can click on donate, request a video. Your name sponsors that video. All right. I was looking. I'm going to do this in one because we got some credits here. So, a little mini movie. Let's go ahead and do it.
We know him as the face on Mount Rushmore, through the words of the Gettysburg Address, the famous bearded statue of the Lincoln Memorial, the great emancipator, the 16th President of the United States. But before Abraham Lincoln was an icon, he was a man. And before he was a president, he was a husband, a father, a young lawyer struggling to make ends meet. Here, a born frontiersman transformed himself into a statesman. Under his folksy veneer, a man of intelligence, ambition, and deep concern about equality. He had arrived in Springfield alone, with no money, not even a place to stay. Here he would find all the pieces of his life: a wife, 4 children, a profession as a lawyer. Here, a young man would become Abraham Lincoln. And when he left Springfield 24 years later, he was headed for the White House and the pages of history. The year was 1837, and a young Abraham Lincoln was riding towards his future. Lincoln had already tried many of the jobs the frontier could offer: carpenter, postmaster, soldier, and surveyor. Now he was hoping for a new start in Springfield, with a law license and unbound ambition. Like Lincoln, Springfield in the 1830s was just getting started. It was a town on the edge of the prairie, with a few brick buildings, no paved roads, and hogs roaming the streets. It was a cross-section of the country, 1,500 Northerners and Southerners, whites and blacks, and immigrants. Thanks in part to Lincoln's work in the Illinois legislature, Springfield had been voted the new capital of Illinois. Lincoln had helped to transform Springfield, and Springfield would in turn change him. On April the 15th, 1837, Lincoln rode into town with everything he owned in 2 saddlebags. His first stop was a general store run by Joshua Speed.
Well, hello.
Say, how much would the furniture for a single bedstead cost? Mattress and sheets.
Okay. $17.
Speed later said, "I thought that I had never seen so gloomy a face. The tone of his voice was so melancholy I felt for him." He suggested a way Lincoln could avoid the debt. He offered to share his room above the store.
That sounds good enough to me. How do I get there?
It's right that way.
It was the beginning of a lifelong friendship.
Well, Speed, I move.
The young Abraham Lincoln was off to a good beginning. John T. Stewart, one of the most successful lawyers in town, had offered him a job as a junior partner. Stewart hoped to win a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, so Lincoln took over most of the legal business. It was a crash course in litigation. But Lincoln also loved politics. He was serving his second term in the state legislature as a representative of the Whig Party, making a name for himself as a forceful speaker. His low-key, easy-going, common-sense style appealed to many, and he soon found himself at the center of a growing group of friends. In the evenings, they would gather together to swap stories and talk politics at Speed's store.
Jones, we were out hunting the other day.
Jones.
Well, Jones was hunting out.
But something was missing. Mary Todd was the daughter of a well-known Kentucky political family. She had come to Springfield to live with her sister Elizabeth. When Lincoln met Mary, he was captivated by her looks, her ambition, her sassy intelligence, and her understanding of raw political power. The year was 1839, and Abraham Lincoln was dumbstruck. Mary's sister said,
Lincoln would gaze on her as if irresistibly drawn by some superior power. He never scarcely said a word.
Elizabeth thought they were a terrible match. But Mary saw a spark there that her sister did not.
So, how you been?
Good. Looking forward to getting out of the house for a little while.
Me too.
And soon she and Lincoln were going out together, talking about marriage, until the day their engagement fell apart. Some said it was due to Elizabeth's disapproval. Some said Lincoln feared that without any savings, he would not be able to support his new wife the way her family had. Whatever the case, Lincoln fell into a depression. He remained in bed for days, cared for by his friend Speed. Lincoln wrote, "I am now the most miserable man living." But by the next year, Lincoln and Mary had started courting again.
I don't know what to say, but
And by the fall, he considered marriage again, even though he had a bad case of cold feet. He wrote Speed,
you have now been the husband of a lovely woman for nearly 8 months. Are you now, in feeling as well as judgment, glad you are married as you are?
And with this ring I thee wed.
Speed must have had the right answer, because a month later, on November the 4th, 1842, Abraham and Mary wed. Lincoln placed a ring on his wife's finger.
I now pronounce you man and wife.
Inside, he engraved, "Love is eternal." They started out living in a rooming house called the Globe Tavern. But the city was expanding in all directions, and so was the Lincoln clan. With the birth of their first son, Robert, they decided to move. Lincoln purchased a small cottage in 1844 from the preacher who had married them. Recently built at the corner of 8th and Jackson, it was a simple 1.5-story home. The cost, $1,500.
Oh, this is wonderful.
Yes.
But to provide for it and his growing family, including a new son, Edward, born in 1846, he would have to work in earnest. Lincoln set himself to his career with a passion. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was a circuit-riding attorney on the 8th Judicial Circuit. That meant that he traveled from town to town all through central Illinois, going from one case to the next. Lincoln would be gone for 3 months at a time, twice a year, leaving Mary alone for long periods to run the home and care for the boys. Meanwhile, Lincoln's career was taking off. He started his own law firm in Springfield. Juries liked Lincoln's down-home conversational style in the courtroom. He developed a gift for making words flow and a reputation for diligence and hard work. Lincoln's skills became evident as he appeared more and more before the Illinois Supreme Court. Leaders across the state began to
believes
notice this young
that
lawyer.
private property is
Combining
protected.
politics with his legal business, Lincoln was starting to build alliances at courthouses across central Illinois. And it was just about to pay off. Lincoln's public speaking and the connections he had formed both at work and through his wife's family convinced him to run for a seat in the U.S. Congress. And when he won a solid victory and became a congressman, it was the biggest step of his young career. The young Lincoln was thrilled to head off to Washington. He brought his family with him, but they soon decided that Washington wasn't really a place for a young family. Abraham packed Mary and the boys back to stay with her parents in Kentucky and knuckled down to work. He voiced opposition to the Mexican War, but was soundly criticized for it. He proposed a bill.
Yeah, he asked James K. Polk where the first shots were fired, knowing that, or like who fired first, and where were the first shots fired, knowing that the first shots were fired by the Americans, because we started that war on purpose. And as soon as he said that, James K. Polk, the 11th president at the time, did what any politician does, and that is to spin it. And what do? Oh, you don't support the troops. And instead of everyone focusing on, well, yeah, where did that shot take place? He doesn't support the troops. Everyone was like, what? You don't support the troops? Lincoln's like, I never said that. I asked where the shots were fired. Yeah, but you don't support the troops. If you're questioning that, how does that, how do you go from here to there? And he had to drop it.
Bill to abolish slavery in Washington, D.C., and got nowhere. Missing his family, he wrote Mary and his sons heartfelt letters.
When you were here, I thought you hindered me in attending to business. But now, having nothing but business, it has grown exceedingly tasteless to me.
The strain of their separation was evident in Mary's letters as well.
How much I wish instead of writing we were together this evening. I feel very sad away from you. I must bid you good night.
Lincoln had pledged before the election that he would serve only one term. And so, in 1849, he found himself headed home, having had a lot less impact than he might have hoped. He seemed to lose all interest in running for other office and buried himself in his work. And then a tragedy hit the family. In 1850, their 3-year-old Eddie Lincoln came down with tuberculosis. He was a rambunctious toddler they all loved, but the disease hit him hard. For 52 days, he struggled and sweated and tried to survive. And on the 53rd day, he died.
Whose life here on earth was all too short.
The funeral service was held in the Lincoln home.
In heaven. And that someday we shall join him.
Abraham and Mary were devastated.
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil.
To fill the void in some small way, the Lincolns had another baby, their third son, William. Another son, Tad, would follow soon after. As the family grew, the work was pouring in. Lincoln became one of the most sought-after attorneys in the state, earning a very comfortable living for his family.
If convicted of thievery, he will be sent to the penitentiary. Gentlemen, what will happen to these children? I beg of you for this man's family. I rest my case.
But it took the passage of a brand new bill, the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, to pull him back into politics. All through these years, America had been slowly tearing itself apart over one of the most bitter issues of the time, slavery. To some, it was a sin. To others, it was a way of life. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 was one of several stopgaps to avoid national conflict. It allowed slavery to continue in the South and the northern territories to stay free, until the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 changed everything. The new act said that any territories that joined the Union could vote on whether to become free or slave states, no matter their location. At the same time, a more restrictive fugitive slave law that had been passed several years earlier allowed slave catchers to capture and sell even free blacks into slavery. Suddenly, everything was up for grabs. Lincoln was outraged.
Mary, Douglas has managed to get the Kansas-Nebraska Act passed.
So Nebraska now has the right to hold slaves?
All the way to Canada. This repeals the Missouri Compromise. This is reckless. It's an outrage.
The law, championed by Senator Stephen A. Douglas, allowed the people of the territories to decide the slavery issue themselves.
Popular sovereignty, whether they wanted slavery in their new state or not. Can I count on...
Douglas was a man from Chicago wanting to run for president, knowing he needed Southern votes. So he was pushing anything that would bring the South to look at him as a guy who's giving them the right to spread slavery. Whether he agreed with it or not, he didn't care about that aspect. He only cared about becoming the president.
Your support.
Lincoln felt that since new territories could choose to be slave states, it could tip the entire country toward slavery. Lincoln began traveling to give speeches, talking out against the new act.
For although volume after volume is written to prove slavery a very good thing, we never hear of a man who wishes to take the good of it by being a slave himself.
Soon Lincoln was running for office again. The year was 1854, and he set his sights on the U.S. Senate. Lincoln was a popular candidate, but back then the Senate was picked by the state legislature, not the voters.
Order! Order! A call for a vote. The vote for United States Senator.
Lincoln.
Lincoln. Lincoln.
Lincoln. Lincoln. Lincoln.
And while he had had enough votes to lead in the first round, he did not have enough votes to win a clear majority.
The only way to do this is to give them to him. Give our votes to Trumbull.
Mary watched with disappointment as Lincoln withdrew his name and allowed another candidate to win, for the greater good of opposing the Kansas-Nebraska Act. But for him, it was just the beginning. Over the next 3 years, Lincoln crisscrossed the region, speaking out against slavery. In 1858, he stepped up to formally oppose the man behind the act he hated so much, Senator Stephen A. Douglas himself. This time, Lincoln was running as a member of the rapidly growing new Republican Party.
For a while before they had their debate, he followed him. I believe this is how it went. He followed him. Douglas will give a speech on a Monday, and Lincoln would give a speech on Tuesday. And it would counter everything that Douglas had said. And so he kept trying to get him to debate, but Lincoln wasn't in Congress or, Senate or anything. Douglas had no need to debate him. It wasn't going to help Douglas at all. It was only going to help Lincoln. Douglas finally gave in. They went on the debates. Douglas ended up winning. Lincoln is thought to have given great speeches, but it didn't stop Douglas from winning.
He came to the Illinois State House to deliver a warning.
Until a crisis shall have been reached and passed. A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided.
For the first time, Lincoln was stepping onto the national stage. And it was a series of debates with his longtime rival Douglas that would grab the nation's attention. 7 debates in 7 towns.
I hold that the Negro is not and ought never be a citizen of the United States. I hold that this government was made on the white basis, by white men, for white men, and their posterity forever.
The New York Evening Post declared, "The prairies are on fire."
I think the authors of that notable instrument intended to include all men, equal in certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. This they said, and this they meant.
Lincoln's Republican Party would beat Douglas's Democrats in the popular election by over 4,000 votes. But Lincoln would lose once again in the state legislature.
Order! Order! The votes have been counted. Mr. Douglas has retained his seat in the U.S. Senate.
But Lincoln would not give up. For the next 2 years, he traveled the country giving speeches. The cause of civil liberty must not be surrendered, he said, not at the end of 1 or even 100 defeats. If the debates with Douglas put Lincoln on the map, it was a speech at New York's Cooper Institute that would mark his arrival as a national figure.
If our sense of duty forbids this, then let us stand by our duty fearlessly and effectively. Let us not be slandered from that duty. Let us have faith that right makes might, and in that faith, let us dare to do our duty as we understand it.
It was a remarkable performance. He had taken a crowd skeptical of this frontier politician and turned them into cheering fans. Lincoln was not the first choice of many in the Republican Party, but thanks in part to the tireless efforts of many friends from Central Illinois working behind the scenes, he became the Republicans' nominee. A committee from the convention traveled to Springfield to read the formal notification of Lincoln's nomination in the parlor of his home.
This is such a great honor and most humbling. Thank you.
Almost immediately, the campaign began in earnest. Lincoln became known as the rail splitter, an honest, hard-working man from the West.
I would just like to point out, if you don't know where Lincoln is, he's the giant over everyone else. He just doesn't have his hat.
One part of his image came from an unexpected source. In October of 1860, Lincoln received a letter from an 11-year-old girl named Grace Bedell. She promised to get the men in her family to vote for Lincoln if he'd let his beard grow.
All the ladies like whiskers, and they would tease their husbands to vote for you, and then you would be president.
When Election Day rolled around, Lincoln waited on edge for the returns. He didn't hear till after midnight.
President-elect Lincoln, we've won New York.
This is wonderful, gentlemen. I know a little woman on 8th Street who would like to hear this. Thank you.
At 1:30 in the morning, Lincoln hurried home to tell his wife the news.
Mary! Mary! We are elected!
Oh, that's wonderful!
We're going to Washington!
Oh,
you should have stayed.
The celebrations began that night in Springfield. A native son had become the president. But there were not celebrations everywhere. With 4 candidates for president, Lincoln did not win the majority of the popular vote. And in some parts of the country, as the votes were being counted, he was subjected to negative portrayals in many newspapers. Just 6 weeks after his election, the first state would secede from the Union. Even as Lincoln was preparing at his home, working to formulate his new administration, the nation was falling apart around him. Lincoln was under extreme pressure to compromise with the South, to give in on the slave issue to save the Union. What should have been a period of celebration was a tense time, a time of uncertainty, as Lincoln held his ground. He wrote,
"If we surrender, it is the end of us and of the government."
The day before he left Springfield, Lincoln returned to his law office and told his partner Herndon, "Tell our clients that the election of a president makes no change in the firm of Lincoln and Herndon. When I come back, we'll go right on practicing law as if nothing had ever happened."
Mr. President.
The following morning, just before 8 a.m., a crowd of townspeople gathered at the Great Western Railroad station to see off their favorite son. In an emotional farewell, the president-elect paid tribute to the town which had shaped him, the one home his family had ever known.
My friends, no one not in my situation can appreciate my feeling of sadness at this parting. To this place and the kindness of these people, I owe everything. Here I have lived a quarter of a century and have passed from a young to an old man. Here my children have been born, and one is buried. I now leave, not knowing when or whether ever I may return, with a task before me greater than that which rested upon Washington. Let us confidently hope that all will yet be well. To his care commending you, as I trust in your prayers you will commend me, I bid you an affectionate farewell.
Lincoln was leaving his home of nearly 25 years to lead a divided country. He could not have known how much it would demand from him. But Lincoln would draw upon lessons he learned in Springfield. 4 years of bloody Civil War would test his strength, his determination, his ability to handle tragedy and keep on going, ultimately staying the course to guide the nation toward a new birth of freedom.
It's kind of sad when you think that he gave that speech from the back of the train, and as he left, the next time he would return to Springfield would be to be buried. No. You know? It's kind of sad when you think about all the plans he had made, finding out the war was over, and his desire to do 4 years to rebuild the nation, then to visit other countries, go back and be a lawyer and all this and that, and out of his control. All right. Well, we're going to end this here. I hope you enjoyed. Would you stop? Yeah. Till next time. Have a good day. Have a good night.